It's Wednesday, April 2nd, 2014, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are colleagues Mike McKean and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, Pew releases the 2014 State of the News Media Report. In it, signs of turnaround for our industry. A tweet taken out of context leads to a call for the cancellation of Comedy Central's Colbert Report. And a Taco Bell ad for its new breakfast menu puts McDonald's on the defensive. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to as well, but I want to start today's conversation by talking about language. What's appropriate for use in the media and what isn't? Jesse Schiedlauer, the author of the book The F Word, wrote an op-ed in Sunday's New York Times critical of the paper for obscuring information by not allowing profanities. He argues society's comfort level with offensive language and content has shifted dramatically over the past few decades, but the stance of the media hasn't. He says that when newspapers hide behind odd phrasing, they hurt the audience, that the elaborate pains taken to avoid saying something dirty only draws more attention to it, and sometimes leaves the reader confused and less informed. I know there's a lot of language that I sometimes use, much to the chagrin of my mother, that I would never dream of putting in print in a newspaper, use on this broadcast. What's your take on this?
Well, I think it's one of those things where as the language changes, I think people get more comfortable with it, but there's still a certain segment of the audience that newspapers in particular generally go after, that you could probably offend by using some of those words. They could be taken out of context. People will focus more on the word than on what the actual story is saying or the information you're trying to convey. So I think that's where newspapers are sort of trying to figure out, can we bend the rules a little bit here and maybe get away with something, or are we going to maybe take it a little bit too far?
I agree with all of that, and I don't want to advocate a free-for-all, but I also think that a lot of the practices we have now are kind of vestiges of a time when there were only a few news outlets, and we thought somehow we had to be arbiters of taste or culture or whatever. And even if we think we'd like to be that still today, I don't see how we really can be. There's just too much media out there, too many other influences, and frankly, sometimes I think it makes us look dumb because we won't use the language that people are actually using, especially when the language itself, the word, is central to the story somehow, right? Like Dick Cheney and what he had to say about a member of the Senate using the F word, right? If you can't use that language in your news reporting, I think you're not only doing a disservice because you're not giving all the facts, but you're being perceived by some people at least as being naive.
I think in those instances where the word is essential to the story, that you're right, Mike, that those words need to be used because that's what the story is about. I mean, Dick Cheney, your Dick Cheney example is perfect in trying to talk about that. But I think in some other cases where you throw a word in there because someone may have said it, may take away from what is actually going on. And you have to also look at the fact that people can actually go and find exactly what the person said. In a lot of cases, they can actually see the video of the person saying it. And I think if newspapers would provide links in their online versions, I think you could probably get away with some of that. But I think you have to be careful and know who your audience is and what they're going to deem to be appropriate or not.
I mean, even among newspapers, there are differences in practices. Mm-hmm. Some will use words that others will not. Some will, bend over backwards to come up with, outlandish euphemisms.
Well, that I think is where the problem
dashes
comes
or
into
whatever.
Play. Yeah.
But if you think about it, I mean, if you're talking about journalism generally, I mean, there are plenty of journalists and news organizations today that use profanity all the time. Magazines, book writers, blogs, documentary producers. There's a lot of journalism where profanities are just fine. The audience expects it.
Right.
And I think probably if you ask most people who read newspapers, most of them would be fine with it too. Radio and TV, broadcast radio and TV, on the other hand, that's a different animal.
And the FCC prohibits obscenities. We've long since used the George Carlin example of the words you can't say is kind of being that standard. Is that dated at this point? Is it time to take a greater look at this? When you look at how rampant it is on cable TV versus broadcast TV?
Well, I mean, even on broadcast TV, I mean, some of the things that you hear on broadcast TV now, every time I, hear it, I mean, I'm just shocked by some of the words. I'm going like, okay, when was that appropriate to say? So I think that's changing over time, and I think it's changing for the good, because this is the vernacular that's being used within society, within culture. And I think if we have a better understanding of what those words mean and how they're used, then there won't be this sort of miscommunication or mistrust in terms of how a word can be used and how it can't be used.
But even if you take the most benign explanation for why the federal government should be involved in regulating what we can say on radio and TV, so it's a safe harbor for kids because it's being broadcast on the public airwaves, and it might come up when they wouldn't know. Kids are surrounded by this kind of language wherever they go. And then if you add in the fact that the vast majority of content now we receive is not over the air, it's from cable and increasingly, or satellite and increasingly from the internet, at what point do we get to where it's not the federal government's responsibility, because it's not scarce public resources that are being used to justify regulating that content?
And I think to a certain extent, especially when you talk about the internet, we're already at that point, because there are places that people can go and kids can go where if their parents are monitoring them, or monitoring their use of the internet, they're going to pick up all sorts of language.
Okay, well, language is a living thing, always evolving, and not just as it relates to profanity. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of cases of words once considered acceptable that today are considered offensive and rarely uttered. Sunday, the Washington Post spiked the Pearls Before Swine comic strip because of a word used in one of its frames. The strip was looking at the evolution of language, pointing out that flight attendant is now preferred to stewardess, and administrative assistant to secretary, housekeeper to maid. In the next one in the list, midget is now little person. That caught the eye of the Post comics editor, and she and her boss agreed that the use of that word felt like a slur. Donna Paramus told media blogger Jim Romanesco that the others seemed to be kind of on that line of political correctness versus this use of the word midget as slur.
Well, I think it's one of those cases where when you have a question about a word and how it's going to be used and the context in which it's going to be used in, that's when you need to basically have someone in the room who can maybe give you some guidance on this. And if you're not sure, it's probably best to take it out. And in this case, this is what they did. Now, I'm sure they're getting backlashes from both sides on whether or not it was appropriate to do so, but in certain instances, you want to err on the side of caution. And when it comes to comics, that is one of the areas in a newspaper where you really have to be careful, because that's one of the areas where you draw your largest audience. And if it's going to come across as being controversial without being in the proper context, then you really need to be careful. And this may be an instance where the point that they were making was made and you didn't have to take it to another level.
I agree that there needs to be a conversation. Anytime there's a question, you should talk about it, not just, make a quick decision. I wonder about this particular decision. I mean, you can justify it, especially because, again, it's on the comics page. But when I was reading the comments section below that particular cartoon, and the comics editor is talking about it, one of the phrases she used was saying basically that the newspaper still has the responsibility to essentially be an arbiter of morality. And I went, what? That's not your responsibility. I'm responsible for my own morals and my own values. That's not your job. You can justify for other reasons deciding to spike that. I wouldn't have done it, but that's not a reason I would have given.
I wouldn't have given that reason either. I mean, you could have easily said, like I was talking about earlier, you could have easily said, we've got some guidance on this, and after talking to a lot of people, we determined that we were going to do this. That would be the appropriate way in which to explain why you made that decision. Mm-hmm. But I'm with you, Mike. I mean, I don't think newspapers, or for that matter, any media should be setting any morality policies, because you've got a vast audience, especially when you're talking about a newspaper like the Washington Post.
And I have to say, and again, I know these are not issues where it's a clear decision, but the whole point of the comic strip was to have a conversation with humor about this issue of what's appropriate language and what isn't. And so to spike that cartoon rather than to put it out there for the purpose that it was
Cuts
intended.
off that discussion entirely. Yeah. Right. Well, maybe context makes a difference. See, because this week we saw what happens when our words appear without it. Maybe you've seen the trending Twitter topic, Cancel Colbert. It all started with this tweet from @ColbertNation, which said, "I am willing to show Asian community I care by introducing the Ching Chong Ding Dong Foundation for Sensitivity to Orientals or whatever." @ColbertNation was the official Twitter account of the Comedy Central show. More on that later. But anyone who had seen the show last Wednesday night on Comedy Central or online had the context to understand the tweet. Here it is. On the show, Colbert mocked Washington Redskins owner Dan Snyder for setting up a charity to aid Native Americans in lieu of changing the team's name. The name of that charity? The Washington Redskins Original Americans Foundation, which led to this.
My show has frequently come under attack for having a so-called offensive mascot. My beloved character, Ching Chong Ding Dong.
Ooh, I love tea. It's so good for you.
Colbert, in his satirical way, said that he would start his own charity, inspired by Snyder.
The point is, offensive or not, Ching Chong is part of the unique heritage of the Colbert Nation that cannot change. But I am willing to show the Asian community that I care by introducing the Ching Chong Ding Dong Foundation for Sensitivity to Orientals or whatever. It is a wonderful charity. Thank you. Yes. I will applaud my sensitivity as well. It's a wonderful charity that's already provided 3,000 of those triangle hats to Asian Americans in need. I assume there's a need because I never see him wearing those things anymore. And I owe all this sensitivity to Redskins owner Dan Snyder. So Asians, send your thank you letters to him, not me.
You can see the full clip on our links blog under the programs tab at KBIA.org. But earlier in the clip, before announcing this satirical charity, Colbert had been talking about how some of the things it was going to be doing, they had donated a couple of $1,000s toward the purchase of a backhoe for use by Native Americans in Oklahoma, the purchase of 3,000 winter coats, a couple of things that really didn't seem to have a whole lot of impact. And that was what led to Colbert's reaction there. But this blew up, and this blew up fast.
Yeah, and it blew up because you had someone who had, on Twitter, a so-called Twitter activist. Mm-hmm. She doesn't actually like the use of that word because it makes it sound like we're dismissing her as not somebody who's serious. But she had been involved in other hashtag campaigns before as they related to how Asians, especially Asian women, are treated. And so, I mean, she probably had we'll take her to word that she had a serious purpose for what she was doing, but she knew that using Twitter and creating this hashtag campaign was going to get a lot more attention than writing a blog post or a letter to the editor or whatever. And when she started this campaign, Cancel Colbert, sure enough, it took off, it started to trend, and then the mainstream media pick it up, and they just can't stand to pass a story that has some sort of social media involved in it now. It's cool to have a story about that. So there you go. Now you've got millions of people talking about it.
And it seems to be cool when that social media story is along some sort of cultural or social chasm, which is what this is sort of brings about.
And it's about media that's not you.
Exactly.
When you can point the finger at somebody else.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and I think one of the things that this points out is that the whole 140 character problem, because you can't provide the context in 140 characters. So if someone reads the tweet but doesn't go back to look at the full clip, then you don't get everything that comes up, what happens, what he was talking about in terms of the Washington Redskins, the fact that there was a lot of satire in this and how it's all set up. And what happens is that people start jumping on these hashtag controversies, and they never really get to the controversy. And that's the context. And that's what's missing here.
Yeah. I'm really divided on this too because, first of all, I think, comedy is sort of like a safe harbor. It's a place where we can go to and we can laugh about things that are serious and maybe learn something about them too. So we ought to maybe cut a little bit of slack to comedians. On the other hand, I can also see the point of view of some critics who say, here's another white male comic who thinks he's privileged to be able to say these things about some other minority. And there was a quote from someone in Salon who wrote about it. She said, you can't make Asian people collateral damage on your way to proving a point about racism toward Native people. Okay, I get that. I think that's a legitimate concern. On the other hand, I really get worried about how people are using these hashtag campaigns now to avoid a reasoned debate. It's like, okay, you got all these options. I can ignore it. I can think about it and write something, in a calm and reflective manner. I can get a little bit upset, or I can go straight to the nuclear option. And that's what these hashtag campaigns are often about, just straight to the nuclear option, attack your enemy, trash them, get something canceled, rather than having a reasoned debate about it.
And I think it's one of those issues where you sort of want everybody to just sort of stop for a minute and figure out what is it that we're actually arguing about. Because I think a lot of that is missing when you have this back and forth, hashtag battle going on, and no one's actually stopping to say, wait a minute, is there some way we can have some civility here? Some place where we can actually talk about moving the conversation forward instead of just doing this sort of circular firing squad.
So you raise a good point about taking a moment, stepping back. It actually took until Monday evening on the Colbert Report for Stephen Colbert or anybody from Comedy Central to really come forward and acknowledge any of this. And the acknowledgement was basically the whole show Monday night. And one of the guests that was on to talk about this and to carry it forward a little bit was Biz Stone, one of the founders of Twitter. And they literally blew up and killed that Twitter account. Was that a smart way to go about doing this? Or should there have been maybe more transparency about what happened?
No, I thought it was funny. And I also thought to a certain in a sort of passive-aggressive way, he did kind of apologize or at least explain, I didn't have control of that account. I wouldn't have done it that way. The context is important. But he continued to be offensive in his own way, and I kind of liked it myself. He summed up at the end of the show basically saying, I was canceled, sort of, for 3 days, just like Jesus. Great. That's hilarious.
Stir the pot just a little bit more.
Just being sort of self-deprecating, I think, kind of calmed the waters a little bit for those who are supportive of Stephen Colbert. But I also think that part of the reason why they decided to go this route was that when you get the national media involved, when it really blows up, I mean, if it just would have stayed in the Twitter world, he probably wouldn't have went to the extent of an entire show. But once it went national, he sort of had to figure out some sort of way to come.
He got a good little bit of media criticism in there toward the end, too, by saying that for a little while, CNN stopped its coverage of the Malaysian flight to focus on him.
Well, one of the most feared days in a newsroom is April 1st. We're all on edge, hoping not to fall victim to an April Fool's joke, either being duped by a fake story or falling victim to a prank at the hands of an unscrupulous colleague. Yesterday, it was the Today Show's Savannah Guthrie trying to pull one over on her co-anchors, only it didn't quite turn out that way.
How does your cookie taste?
It's so minty. Is there a minty Oreo? It tastes like mouthwash.
Does it taste like Colgate or anything?
I think it's probably toothpaste.
It is?
April
my gosh!
Mine's fine.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
Well, then there's a mistake. You are the person who needs the April.
What's your idea? That yours is normal.
It's a normal Oreo.
Yeah, see, mine had toothpaste. I could smell it.
Mine has toothpaste.
Yeah.
Was this your thing?
Well, it's our producer's joke on all of you.
Mine was delicious.
Well, that's a mistake.
This had to be the Don Magic Tom Mozzarella. This is about as lame as it gets.
Is there some law that you can't mess with someone's Oreo?
So wait a minute. As an April Fool's joke, you tried to get us all to eat toothpaste?
And I ate it?
My boss has asked me to participate.
If your boss has asked you to jump off a bridge, would you?
Wow,
They gave me real Oreos, yes.
May I go on record? I saw this coming from a mile away. I didn't touch my cookie.
May
I also go on record and tell you that they came to me early this morning and said we're going to give you real Oreos.
The look on Matt Lauer's face there is classic. The whole, we were all in on the joke. You thought you were fooling us. We were all fooling you. Someone else said April 1st is the day. It's when we all turn into morning shock jocks, that we lose whatever maturity we have and are all looking to pull something off on someone. Why is that?
I have no idea, but it's one of those things where when I see something like this, I just want to go, make it stop, please, just stop. I mean, I think Al Roker was right. I mean, that was one of the lamest April Fools.
Here's a cookie with toothpaste.
Yeah, one of the lamest April Fools jokes going. But I one of those kind of people. Just April Fools, when it starts coming up, I'm like, who knows what's going to happen? It's sort of like you go in your office, you close your door, and wait for it to go by.
I think it also proves the point that we've made many times. Comedy is hard.
It is hard.
There are paid professionals who sometimes screw up, like Stephen Colbert, right? Let them do these things.
Yep.
Sometimes, though, they have real consequences. I mean, there was something on Jim Romanesco's blog even pointing back earlier this week as kind of the big warning of who's going to do what that's going to happen, that pointed back to something that happened here on our campus when the man-eater changed its masthead to the carpet eater not so long ago.
I mean, it's one of those. I think Mike is absolutely right. I mean, it's sort of, you sort of have amateur comedians trying to use that day, April Fool's Day, as a way to sort of take it to the next level, and it just doesn't work out. It usually falls flat on its face, and you wind up being, in the Twitter world or on YouTube looking like an idiot because, as Al Roker said, it just becomes lame. It's just,
So when you see a post from your favorite TV station that says that the sports anchor and the weather anchor are changing positions for the day, just don't believe it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although for sweeps, they might actually have done that.
I guess we'll look in May. Our next topic, maybe not so funny. The Pew Research Center released its 2014 State of the News Media Report. It shows, though, that there is some reason to be excited and even hopeful for the future of American journalism. Fill us in. What were some of the things that came up this year?
Well, so I think it's a mixed message, actually. I mean, it did show that there are a lot of web-only brands that have started doing more news, hiring on serious journalists. You think about BuzzFeed, Mashable, Pierre Omidyar's new operation with Glenn Greenwald. So there are more journalism jobs and more serious journalism being done online. Still a little bit of slippage in newspapers, and the study showed that still most original journalism comes from newspapers. So that's something not to be terribly sanguine about. And then it showed that TV news, which is always at the top of the list of people saying where they get theirs as their source, is still true. And TV viewing is actually up, TV news viewing from last year to this. But at the same time, local stations, far fewer of them now are doing their own original content. And there's a lot of consolidation going on in the industry, which could have a negative impact on local coverage.
And I think where the problem comes in is that, most people will get their local news from their local newspaper or local television station. And as they cut back, there's less of that going on. I mean, in a lot of places, there is very, very little, if any, state coverage. And I'm talking about state government coverage. And with all the budget cuts that's going on and across the country, where you have the Medicaid issue, which has actually gone down to the state level, and there needs to be some serious coverage there, and it's just don't have the resources to do that.
Or same issue going on in Washington, where local publications aren't sending people to go cover their congressmen, their senators in the same way, putting pressure on them to keep them accountable to constituents back home.
Right. And I think part of the issue here is that the news organizations are having a hard time trying to monetize their digital content, trying to figure out who's actually reading that and how they and the advertisers can actually reach them, because people are going everywhere looking for news and information, and they're getting it by and large. What's missing is, especially at the local level, how are people actually getting that news and information? And one of the things I read somewhere else outside of this was one of the ways that local television stations are really trying to reach people is on a digital sense, is weather. I mean, a lot of them have actually gone to separating their weather content from their news content in their digital environments, which I think is one of the ways they're hoping to actually connect the eyeballs with the advertisers.
Yeah, when they were talking about money, I mean, one of the things I thought was interesting from the report was focusing on the distinction between sort of experiments and business models. I mean, how translatable is a billionaire coming in and starting up a new news organization or buying out a newspaper? How translatable is having some foundation or other nonprofit give money for some startup to do a particular kind of news? Those are all admirable activities, but is that going to save journalism? The one area where they saw some optimism, and I think this this is really good, there's been a continued growth in online videos and online advertising videos and news videos. Young people especially are attracted to those things. So it might be possible that if we can create more interesting and effective online advertising and news videos, we could make some real money from it.
Yeah, I think the problem there becomes making sure that there is a differentiation between what is an ad and what is news. Because when
that's not the trend, by the way, right?
Yeah, that's not the trend. No, because that wall is definitely gone, and there's definitely a mixture there. And I think that you could easily see, either an advertiser getting burned or the news side getting burned because there's not any clear focus on which direction those videos are going to go.
Ironic you should say that. Yo quiero Taco Bell. Remember that from the late 90s when Taco Bell had a chihuahua pushing chalupas? That might have been the last time Taco Bell had a campaign running that was funny, until now. Here's the chain's latest, which promotes its new breakfast menu.
To show you just how much people are loving Taco Bell's all-new breakfast, we asked some very special people.
My name is Ronald McDonald.
You're who? I am Ronald McDonald.
I'm Ronald McDonald Jr., and this is Ronald McDonald III.
My name is Ronald McDonald.
What do you think?
That's really good. I was surprised how good it is.
I love the new AM Crunch Wrap.
I'm Ronald McDonald.
Ronald McDonald.
I'm Ronald McDonald, and I love Taco Bell's new breakfast.
A delicious new breakfast everyone can love, even Ronald McDonald.
McDonald's isn't taking this sitting down, posting this picture on its Facebook page, showing the Ronald McDonald character petting a chihuahua with the caption, "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery." The Golden Archers may say that they're flattered, but it looks like they're feeling threatened.
Well, I mean, breakfast is a big part of the revenue from fast food, especially for McDonald's. I think it's something like 20-something% of their revenue, right? And you got somebody coming in, and Taco Bell, they come up with some pretty interesting, like Doritos Crunch Wrap tacos. Mm-hmm. Well, now they've got the waffle taco for all the wrong reasons. That sounds pretty good. So I'd be worried too.
Well, I think part of it is, it's really creative to go out and find all these guys who are named Ronald McDonald and put them all in the ad, and it's for your competition. It's sort of one of those things where you go like, why did McDonald's think of that? Go and gather all these people and use them in your own commercial, but Taco Bell comes up with it and uses it against you.
This isn't the first time that it's actually been done. Jack in the Box did this a few years back.
Right. And also, let's take a look at what McDonald's is doing in response. In addition to the cute picture of Ronald McDonald petting the chihuahua, they're giving away free coffee.
For 2 weeks. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's one of those things where I think, it is the sincerest form of flattery to actually mimic someone. But in a way, I think it's going to help both organizations in the long run.
Okay, well, that music means we're pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about the topics we talked about today. Check out our links blog. You can find it under the programs tab at KBIA.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave us comments or questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show and to Pat Akers for handling the audio. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.